How big a threat are these strikes that we're seeing? Because clearly we've gone through a history of strikes in Nigeria over the years. But then these are coming at a time where we're trying to fix the subsidy issues. We're trying to get the power reforms on track. But yes, we're hearing a lot of strikes in the horizon.
Well, particularly so for the power sector workers. It's clear that the power sector unions have taken a position to attempt to frustrate or derail the reforms in the sector. And as the reforms reach a critical stage, their agitations and their obstructionism gets higher. But even for the refineries that you mentioned, the petroleum workers have generally also been opposed to, curiously I may say, to deregulation of the sector, and in this case, worryingly, because they went on strike against the fuel subsidies. And claim to want government to hold the people to account. And now they're going to strike for the opposite reason, pressuring government to pay those government things defrauded the subsidies.
Well, clearly, even the Ministry of Finance and the government in general have more or less queried this strike in particular. But then there's also the issue of legality of strikes. And the big question is, are these things legal? The power sector, the Minister of Power, for instance, has said any strike is illegal. They're basically looking to see how they can sort out those severance pay packages issues. But then the big question is legality of strikes. Is law enforcement in labor matters a big challenge in Nigeria?
The government has been weak in its relationship with labor. You find that labor has functioned more or less like a political opposition in many cases. Many of the strikes they've gone to have been explicitly ruled illegal by courts.
Right.
But in the face of the absence of a credible political opposition, the labor tends to act in that role. And therefore, their strikes have become a matter of political, it's almost a political issue rather than a legalistic issue. So whether or not a court says it's illegal, labor, as long as it enjoys support from the people, tends to get away with whatever it does. In this case of the petroleum workers, clearly the people were against them, and therefore they had to call off that strike because Nigerians could not understand what peng, that's the junior workers union, what their point was. What did you want government? The Nigerian workers support government holding the people to account, those who stole subsidy funds, and therefore you see that in the absence of popular support, the strike had to be called off. Right. And same with the power workers. Most of the agitation has been frustrated precisely because Nigerians are not too excited about helping power sector workers who have denied them electricity.
Well, clearly, foreign investors are looking at what's going on. People who are looking to bring money to Nigeria may be concerned about how they deal with workers in Nigeria. And we do know that, I think it was in the Obasanjo era, we did see some reforms to the labor laws. Maybe we can speak about that, the implications of those reforms, plans
Well, the main thing Obasanjo did, yes, was to try and deregulate the labor space. Right. We had a labor monopoly, which made labor very powerful. Right. One union controlled the whole country, across all industries, across all sectors.
Quite integrated.
So in effect, that union could cripple government. But the laws deregulated the sector. A new union, the TUC, came to join the pre-existing NLC. But what has happened is that NLC and TU have broadly collaborated. And therefore, that move to deregulate and cause some maybe divide and rule does not seem to have worked.
But what about in the private sector? I know in the oil and gas space, we do hear of strikes.
I think investors can take some comfort from this fact. The 2 or 3 key areas in which unions tend to have overwhelming power are those sectors that have remained public sector monopolies, power and in the petroleum. To the extent that sectors have been deregulated, the markets, whether financial services, telecoms, all those areas that have FMCG, ICT, all of those areas that have been deregulated, the labor is fairly on the same page with the investors, with capital. So I think that deregulation of power will see the same dynamic, and probably the building of private refineries and all of that will also see that dynamic. So you probably would have more liberal labor unions.
Okay, but let's look at the threat now. I asked you this earlier, but maybe you can speak more to this. particularly in the power sector. We know that many people have congratulated the government so far with the progress made so far. But then again, if we don't sort out the labor issues, can we really get this privatization program completed by October as the government is planning?
What I think, I hope, and I sincerely think that the privatization will be completed. The issue is that it is certain that Labour will seek to obstruct that process all along the way. So far, they have tried, and government has prevailed, at least up to this point. Government, in some cases, has adopted the option of paying them off. Whatever they ask for, we pay them, we pay them, we pay them. There's a limit to how far that is sustainable. I think at some point there will be a test of will between Labour and government. Government has put soldiers at all power stations, indicating its intent to force through the process. But at the end of the day, it will be a test of will. I think the deciding factor will be whether Nigerians want power sector reform or not. I think Nigerians want
Okay, and then let's come to the more recent one, the new peng strike.
Yes.
What we're hearing now is that there's been a truce of
They've
some sort
called off the strike
for 2 weeks. That's what we're hearing.
To dialogue.
How do you see this playing out?
It's difficult for Labour to win the argument that government should pay petroleum companies that have been indicted of fraudulently taking subsidy funds. On the other hand, I understand where the new peng is coming from. They are workers of these companies. Many of these companies, given the amount of liabilities government says they have incurred, are probably going out of business.
Right.
Labour wants to ensure the survival of its employers. That dynamic, of course, is risky. At the end of the day, I think that the reality is that some of these companies may go out of business if they have to refund those sums of money. Some of the Labour workers will have to, may lose their jobs. And so, yeah, you can expect that Labour is going to be fervent about this. And some of the companies indicted are large companies. And some of the figures they have been asked to pay are huge sums. Capital Oil, MRS, all of that, large sums. So, yeah, I project that some of them will go out of business. But I think that at the end of the day, the government will seek some compromise in which it can pay off those who can be cleared or where there's some reasonable explanation for the accusations that they have been indicted.
You know, the view of some analysts is that where the government is going with all this is to deregulate the power sector. And, you know, they tried in January. Unfortunately, it couldn't happen. Now, give us your thoughts. Do you think we're still going that way?
Most certainly, I think we're going that way. But I always recognize after the January strikes that government could not raise that issue except it dealt with the issue of the fraudulent payments under the scheme. Now it has acquired some credibility by at least attempting to hold people to account. And I think the debate may now be back on the table.